In this video, we are going to talk about hooking up contextual action bars with list views. So we talked about contextual action bars in the past, but let me go ahead and show you exactly the application that we're going to be putting together in this video looks like. So what we have here is a basic application, and we have a list of customers. So we're still using the basic customer example here because it's a list. It could be a list of anything. So we have 100 items. And up here we have our action bar, and we can add additional customers, and that's pretty cool. And we can also click on customers, and it says right here in this little toast, showing customer blah blah blah, but in a real app it might show a details screen or something like that. Anyway, what makes this app interesting, however, is I implemented a contextual action bar. So if I long click on one of these items, notice how the item becomes selected, and also notice how the action bar changes based off the context, the contextual part of the contextual action bar. And you'll notice up here, we have this back button, and what that does is it unselects that item we selected. We have a delete button, which deletes that item, and we have a show button, which has the same effect as just clicking on the item. However, when we're in this mode, we can click and select multiple items like that. And also notice how the button disappears, how the show button disappears, and we're left with just the delete button. Because if we have multiple customers selected, we don't want to have the show appear, because that really only makes sense if we had one selected. So instead, we just have delete. So in this video, we will be putting this application together. So we won't be spending a whole lot of time on making the list view itself fancy, because we already talked about how to do custom adapters and custom views and all that fun stuff. So yeah, I guess let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start off with a blank application. I'm going to build up our customer class again that we've been using and just go from there, just so that we don't have any other code messing with us from the previous videos. So for the application name here, it doesn't really matter. List view cab. Cab stands for contextual action bar, so if you ever see cab somewhere, that's what that means. Now I'll hit next. We will be using, we'll be targeting 4.2 for the minimum SDK, and we'll select blank activity and we'll hit finish. Now everything that I'm going to show you guys in this video will work on any Android version more than or later than version 3, so 3 or later, because the contextual action bar was introduced in version 3. But I do usually like targeting 4.2 when I can, so that the margin start and margin end, for example, are available. Okay, so really quickly, let's go ahead and we're looking at our activity main layout. Let's nuke this text view, because I'm going to be replacing it with the list view. And it's going to have match parent, and we're going to self-close it, and we're going to give it an ID of activity main list view, just like what we did before. All right, so now that we've done that, we can go ahead and we can jump into the package, because I got to create my awesome customer class. So I'm going to right-click, select new Java class, and we're going to do customer. Delete that awful heading there, and we're going to give him a private string. We're just going to give him private string name, give him a constructor, give him a getter, and override the toString method that simply returns getName. So it's a really simple class with one field. I'm just, of course, like I said in the last videos, using this instead of primitive types because this is a more common scenario to use a fully functioning domain object like this inside of our list views. Now that we have that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to really quickly clean up my main activity a little bit, get rid of the extraneous comments here, and nuke that line entirely and leave it like that. So what I just did is I cleaned up some of the extraneous code just so that we have a little bit more vertical space to work with. Now, we will be using the options menu in the main activity, which is why I didn't delete this entirely. All right, the way that I'm going to do this, because we're going to have a lot of code in this main activity class, and a lot of code is going to depend on other bits of code. So what I'm going to do is I'm really quickly just going to stub out all of the methods and all of the classes that we're going to be needing in this particular example application. So we'll be needing our onCreate options menu, onOptions item selected, and all that fun stuff. We're also going to need a handful of other helper methods to clean up our code a little bit. So I'm going to write a private void show customer method, which takes in a customer. Now, this method is responsible for showing a customer. And what I mean by that is, imagine this application has a list of customers, and when you just normal press on one, it'll bring up a new activity that shows that customer. So that's what this method it will be invoked for. Then we're going to have a private void delete customers. That'll take in a iterable customer object called customers. So the delete customers method will simply be responsible for removing customers from our data source. Then I'm going to have a private void toggle customers selection, or toggle customer selection, which will take a customer object. Now, the toggle customer selection method will be responsible for when we want to select a customer. So when we do the long press and we open up our action mode, when we click on another customer, this method will be invoked. All right, we will be needing a customer adapter. We'll be writing our own adapter class. Now, I'm going to keep the adapter stuff as small as possible as far as code goes, because we've beaten adapters to death already. So I'm going to implement the least amount of code required for this example, which is going to be a private class, and I'm going to call this customers adapter, which will inherit from array adapter of customer. Then he's going to have a constructor. And in this case, in order to get this code to compile, I'm going to need to implement this constructor, but fortunately it's only one line of code, so I will do that right here. All of this constructor is going to do is he's going to invoke the constructor of the base type, of the super type, in this case array adapter of customer. And for the parameters, the first thing I need to pass in is main activity.this, and for the second parameter I'm going to pass in r.layout.list underscore item underscore customer. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stub the getView method. And so our customers adapter is going to override the array adapter's getView method. Why are we doing that? Well, we're doing it because we're going to be doing our selections. We're going to be physically changing the appearance of the individual list items when we select them. So for example, as you can see here in the gallery application, when we long press on one of these items, notice how the visual display of these items changes. They get this nice little blue border around them. So we do need to override the getView method of our customers adapter to do that. And the quickest way to override a member in IntelliJ is going to be alt-insert, type in OVE to get to the override methods option, hit enter, and then type in the name of the method you want to override, in this case, getView. And then all I have to do is hit enter, and now I have a awesome method stub for overriding that. We'll keep its implementation how it is at this point, because it simply returns super getView. So we will flesh this implementation out later. The next thing I want to do is I want to stub out our contextual action bar callback. So if you recall, the contextual action bars work by having this object called the callback, which is responsible for things like inflating the menu of the contextual action bar, as well as dealing with button clicks on the contextual action bar. So to do that, I'm going to say private class, and I'm going to say customer action mode callback, or customer action mode callback. And he's going to implement an interface. And now the interface he implements, pay very, very close attention to this. It is going to be action mode, but we want to use the action mode that comes from android.support.v7.view. So remember, type in capital A, because the IntelliSense in IntelliJ is case sensitive for the first letter. And then when the autocomplete window comes up, go ahead and hit the down arrow to select Android.support v7 view. And that's because we are using the app-compat library, the action bar compatibility library, and because of that we need to use the support version of action mode. So we'll hit enter, and of course that'll, at the top, we're not done yet, at the top that'll bring a import statement. And then I'll hit dot and do callback. So the interface isn't action mode. The interface is a interface inside of the action mode class. But in order to get the right callback, we had to import the correct action mode class. Now let's throw our curlies in. And you'll notice when you throw the curlies in, we got a bunch of squiggly code. And that's because we say we're implementing this interface, but we don't have those methods stubbed out yet. We can really quickly do that by placing our keyboard cursor on the squigglies, hitting Alt-Enter, and then hitting enter, and then hitting enter again. And what that'll do is that'll stub out the required methods for the action mode. In this case, on create action mode, on prepare, on item clicked, and on destroy action mode. And that's pretty much it as far as what we need to stub out before we can start implementing methods. Now, what I want to do before we start implementing methods is I want to go ahead and create the layout file, because we still have an error in our code right here where inside of our customer's adapter, we are referencing a layout that doesn't exist. Now, the easiest way to fix this, like most things in IntelliJ, is put your keyboard cursor on the red, hit Alt-Enter, and make sure you find an item called create layout resource file named list-item-customers.xml or list-item-customer.xml. We'll hit that, but before you hit enter from here, I'm actually going to change the root element. I'm going to change the root element to a text view. So it's not going to be a linear layout, it's going to be a text view. And we'll hit enter, and we'll hit enter, and we get our awesome text view. So I'm going to go ahead and make that not look gross, and make this self-closing, again for stylistic reasons. A little bit easier to read. What I'm going to do here is on the layout height, I'm going to give it a wrap content. And on the padding, I'm going to give it an 8 device-independent pixels padding in each direction. Now, the reason that that this will work is because, if you recall, when we talked about array adapters, if you pass in a layout for an array adapter, but you don't specify an ID of a text view, the array adapter will assume that the layout that you're passing in this case, list item customer, as you can see in this line of code right here, the array adapter will assume that this layout contains and only contains a text view. And then what the array adapter will do is it'll populate that text view's text with the text of the item that is required by the toString method invoked on our custom domain object. Anyway, that pretty much gets our code to compile, and everything is all stubbed out. So we can now, well, except for our fields, which I guess we'll go ahead and write our fields first, or next. So at this point, let's go ahead and get our application at least showing some customers, and then we'll start progressively working up on our contextual action mode. Now, what we need to do is we need to put in some fields up here, and the fields that we need are going to be our private list view. So we'll be able to access our list view object from the entirety of this class. Oh, I don't really like that extra line right there. There we go. A private hash, so this is interesting, a private hash set, not hash map, hash set of customer called selected customers. Okay, so this is an interesting thing here. What are we doing? Well, a hash set in Java is, well, just that. It's basically a set. You can think of it in the mathematical terms of a set. So it's an unordered collection of items where each item is unique. We're using that to keep track of what customers are selected. Now, it's interesting to point out here that there are multiple ways of accomplishing this. Sometimes you'll see people using sparse arrays. Sometimes you'll see them using sparse Boolean arrays. Sometimes you'll see them naively using an array list. Sometimes even you'll see people who put a field on the object itself to determine if that particular object is selected or not. Now, depending on your situation, how many items you're expecting to use, and how comfortable you are with particular data structures, all of those options can be used at some point. But in this case, I am storing the selected customers in a hash set. Now, you might be asking me why I don't use the checked functionality, the choice mode of list view, like we talked about in the last video. Well, the reason is that'll actually bring in a significant amount of additional complexity, which I don't want to deal with. So instead, what we're doing is we are managing our own representation of which customers are currently selected in the list view, and that's what that hash set is for. So next up, we need our adapter. So I'm going to say private customers adapter, and I'll just call this adapter. And then finally, we need our action mode, and we'll call this action mode. Make sure when you look at the IntelliSense that you're selecting the Android.support.v7.view action mode. So the action mode, again, we talked about contextual action bars before, but the action mode is kind of the object that represents the contextual action bar being shown and hidden. You'll see an example of this being used very shortly. So let's go on and start working on the onCreate method here. So for the onCreate method, after I set the content view, the next thing I want to do is instantiate the objects that I need to instantiate. So my selected customers, for example, is a hash set and has to be instantiated. So we went ahead and did that. Next up, let's go ahead and create our adapter. So I'll say adapter equals new customers adapter. And then let's fill our adapter up with stuff. So I'm going to say for each var or for int I equals 0, I smaller than 100, I plus plus. And then we'll say adapter.add new customer. And we'll just say customer space plus integer toString I. So customer 1, 2, 3, 4, or 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Maybe we can just start counting from 1 by saying it plus 1. It doesn't really matter. We have 100 customers, and they're all added to our adapter. Now let's get our list view. So here's a line of code that I'm sure you guys are sick of writing by now. List view equals cast to list view, find view by ID, r.id list view. So get that written out. Then the first thing we want to do with our list view is, of course, let it know about our adapter. So we'll say set adapter on that. And then what I want to do is I want to handle two instances here, two events on the list view. Now, the first event is going to be when the user taps an item. The second event is going to be when the user long clicks on an item. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to say list view dot set on item click listener. Then I'm going to say new, and then I'm going to hit capital O. That's important, otherwise it doesn't show up. Capital O, and you see right here the first autocomplete is on item click listener with the curlies and the dot dot dot. And this simply signifies that we are about to create a anonymous inner type that implements an interface. So we'll hit enter, and we'll get all that awesome boilerplate code written for us. Okay, so what happens when a user taps an item? Well, there's two answers to that question. So if I drag down our gallery app, watch what happens when I just click on one of these pictures. The picture just appears. However, if I hold click on an item and the contextual action bar appears, and then I select and then I click on these items again and just tap them, notice how the behavior's changed. Now what we're doing is we're actually selecting additional items. So that's what I have to do inside of this onClick callback. Basically, the first thing I need to do is get a reference to the customer. So I'm just the customer that was clicked. So I'll say customer equals adapter get item position. Then I need to determine, is the action bar open? Is the contextual action bar open? How do I do that? I simply say if action mode does not equal null. Now, if action mode does not equal null, that means the contextual action bar is open. And that means what I want to do is I want to select this object, or I want to toggle the selection of this customer. So I can do that by saying toggle customer selection, passing in the customer object I want to toggle. Next up, what's the else case here? So if the action mode is null, meaning we're not in a contextual action bar mode, what do we want to do? Well, we simply want to select a customer. Or what did I call that? Show customer. Okay, so let's go ahead. We've handled our tap. Let's do our long click. So I'm going to say list view dot set on item long click listener. Remember, that long is important there, otherwise you'll be invoking the incorrect method. We'll hit enter, and then I'm going to say new, capital O-N, and then enter. And what that'll do is that'll again just generate this anonymous inner type that implements the on item long click listener interface. Now, this method does expect a Boolean return, and the Boolean simply indicates if we did something. So if we handled this event, return true, otherwise return false. So let's go ahead and write this method. I'm going to clear out that return statement, and I'm going to say customer equals adapter get item position. So that gets the customer that was long clicked on. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say toggle customer selection, because again, what we're doing here in the item long click is we're opening up the contextual action bar, and the first thing we need to do is select the customer. So the customer object is selected. We're not showing the customer, we're selecting him. Then what I need to do is I need to go ahead and return true. Now, the contextual action bar being open and closed is going to be handled by the toggle customer selection method. Alrighty, so now that we have that all done, what I want to do now is I want to implement our main menu. So I want to go ahead and add a menu item that'll allow us to insert a customer. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and control click on main menu right here, which will open up the resource menu main.xml file. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear out this item right here entirely. I'm going to fix up these so they look a little nicer. And then I'm going to create one item. The item will have an ID of menu main add customer. The title will be add customer. And the app show as action will be always. So this will be our awesome little add customer button in our main menu, which will, of course, appear on the action bar. So now coming back to main activity.java, now that I've done that, I can go into the onOptions item selected method and implement it. So I can say if item get, no, not get group ID, get item ID equals r.id main menu add customer. Then I'm going to go ahead and create a customer. So I'm going to say adapter, and I'm going to say insert new customer, and I'm going to call this inserted customer plus integer.toString adapter.get count. And then for the second parameter, I'm going to pass in 0. So what I'm doing here is I'm inserting a customer into the first item. So next up, we have show customer. And show customers can be really easy because all I'm going to be doing here is simulating clicking on a customer. So simulating, for example, showing a customer screen, switching to a customer activity. And in this case, I'm simply going to show a toast. So I'm not going to bother making a separate activity to navigate to because that's really not the point of this particular video. So I'm going to say toast make toast, showing customer.getName, give it a toast.length short length, and then make sure to invoke the show method at the end. Okay, now let's go ahead and delete our customers. To delete our customers, what we need to do is I'm going to do something weird here. I'm going to say adapter.setNotifyOnChanged false for customer in customers. I'm going to say adapter.remove customer, and then I'm going to say adapter set notify on change true and adapter.notify dataset change. So why did I do that? This is actually the first time in this small little mini series about list views that I did this. And it's something that you should always do whenever you have a bulk operation on an adapter. The reason is we are performing a bunch of item removals from this array adapter. And every time that we invoke this remove method, if I hit control click on this remove method, we can see the source code of this. And we see that if notify on changed is enabled, it'll invoke notify dataset changed for every customer that's deleted. So let's say we are deleting 10 customers. That is 10 invocations of notify dataset changed. Why is that a bad thing? Well, if you recall, notify dataset changed is responsible for the list view, telling the list view that the adapter has changed. And by changed, it could mean anything. It could mean that the adapter got an item, removed an item was switched around, an item was changed, and basically it'll result in a complete re-rendering of the list view. We don't want to deal with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to temporarily set notified on change to false so that these methods, such as remove, do not automatically invoke the notify dataset changed. And then when we're done with the bulk operation, we're going to set notify on change back to true, and then we're going to perform our own manual notify dataset changed, so that notify dataset changed only gets invoked once. Anyway, so that's our delete customers method. Now let's look at our toggle customer selection method. This method is quite a bit more interesting. Now, the first thing I want to do with toggle customer selection is I want to handle this. Remember this this hash setup here, the selected customers? I want to handle that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if selected customers dot contains customer, then that means this customer was already selected and we want to deselect him. So I'm going to say selected customers dot remove customer. Otherwise, selected customers dot add customer. So we're basically just toggling whether or not this customer is inside of this hash set, and that's what we're doing there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if you just toggled the last customer off. So for example, so watch this. I long click to open up the contextual action bar. I select some items, but watch what happens. I'm going to deselect that item. I'm going to deselect that item. And then when I deselect this item, notice how the contextual action bar goes away. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, after you toggled that customer, if the selected customer's collection is empty and the contextual action bar is active, then finish it and return. Basically disable the contextual action bar. So I'm going to say if selected customers dot size equals 0 and action mode does not equal null. So if we no longer have anything selected and we're in an action mode, then simply say action mode dot finish and return. Do an early exit out of this method because there's nothing else to do. Now that we've done that, now we have another if condition. 3 if conditions in a row. And what this is going to do is basically, so we want to toggle a customer selection. We want to select a customer, right? But what if our action mode isn't open yet? What if our contextual action bar isn't open? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if action mode equals null, then what this means is we're toggling the customer selection, but the action mode is null. So what we should do is we should, well, create the action mode. And to do that, we simply say action mode equals start. Now, this is important. Start support action mode, not start action mode. Not this. Start support action mode because we're working with the compatibility library, the app compatibility library that uses the support methods. And then we'll say set support action mode and we'll instantiate our callback. So we'll instantiate new customer action mode callback here. Now, we have another condition here. So I'll put an else in here. So if we're toggling a customer and the action mode is already created, we actually have to still do something. And that is, what I want to have happen is, I want it to be where if you have one customer selected, a certain set of action mode buttons appear. And if you have more than one customer selected, a certain set of action mode buttons appear. So why would you want that? Well, let's say that you want to be able to bulk delete customers through this feature, right? So you would open up an action mode, you would select a bunch of customers, and you would hit the delete key that would appear on the contextual action bar. But what if you wanted to have another thing on the contextual action bar that only applies if you only have one customer selected, such as show customer? What if you wanted to be able to long click on a customer object and have a show customer button appear and you click on that, but you want that show customer button to disappear if more than one customers are selected? To do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a built-in feature of action mode. I'm going to say action mode dot invalidate. So if we change our selection and our action mode is already enabled, then we invalidate it. What does invalidating it do? Well, it tells the callback to recreate, or not necessarily recreate, but mutate its menu. So it gives the action mode callback an opportunity to change its menu, and that's why we invoke the invalidate method. Otherwise, the callback would not be informed whenever the amount of customers that are selected changes. The final thing that I want to do here is I'm going to say adapter dot notify dataset changed. So down here at the bottom, I'm saying, okay, we just changed what customers are selected. So you need to go in and you need to re-render your list view so that any sort of visual indication that we want to have with our list items gets set properly. All right, one quick thing before we get down to our adapter is people who are paying really close attention might notice a bug with this code. And right now it looks like a bug, but let me explain why it isn't. Notice action mode right here. Notice how we're determining whether or not to instantiate a new action mode, whether or not action mode is null, correct? That seems like a reasonable thing to do. But do we ever set action mode to null? It starts off null, right? But after we open up the action mode for the first time and we finish it, look at that. We're just invoking action mode.finish. We're not setting it back to null. You might think, well, we should do this instead. That is correct. However, we will be handling this in a different part of the code. We'll be handling this action mode equals null from within our callback. So I just wanted to point that out for anybody who thinks they might have spotted a bug with the code. And if you did, awesome. That means you're paying really close attention here. But it isn't a bug. All right, so let's jump down to customer's adapter here, and let's finish him off. So basically, we need to implement the getView method. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to replace this code with viewView equals super getView, convert view parent. Okay, so what am I doing here? Well, right here I'm saying array adapter, go ahead and do your thing and give me the view back. That's it. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say customer equals adapter get item position, which will get the row, the individual list item view row for the customer, or get the customer for the particular list item that we're looking at. Then I'm going to say if selected customers contains customer. So if this customer is selected, then say view dot set background color to color dot parse color, and then in quotes hash B2EBF2. It's another color that I got from the material design guidelines. Then I'm going to say otherwise view.setBackground null. So if you're selected, give yourself a nice background. Otherwise, set your background back to transparent. Then I'm going to simply say return view. All right, so that's our customer's adapter. All right, we're almost done here. We have our action mode callback left, and that's really all about it that we have left. So we're going to need to do this. We're also going to need to create a menu. So, all right, let's just go down method by method by method. Starting off with on create action mode, let's inflate our menu. Now, let's be sure to pass in return true. So make sure that you're returning true from on create action mode to tell the action mode that you do have a menu that needs to be shown. So what here I'm going to do is I'm going to say get menu inflator dot inflate r dot menu dot, and in this case I'm going to pass in menu underscore main underscore customers. So what am I doing here? I'm referencing a menu that doesn't exist yet. We'll create it in a second. Then for the second parameter, I'm going to pass in menu, and that'll be the menu that gets inflated. Now for this red stuff right here, so this menu doesn't exist yet, that's why we're getting an error here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit, not surprisingly, Alt-Enter, Enter, Enter. And that'll go ahead and generate me a nice little menu resource inside of my res menu folder. As you can see, menu, or manu. Let's go ahead and let's fix that. Refactor, I'm going to select rename, and I'm going to say menu. All right, so I just renamed that real quick. Hopefully you guys didn't follow that typo. Okay, so for our menu is going to be interesting. So I want to have two items. The first item is going to have an ID of plus ID slash menu main customers, and we'll say delete. We'll give it a title of delete, and we'll just leave it like that. Next up, I'm going to do something interesting. I'm going to open up a group. I'm going to say group ID menu main customers, and then I'm going to say underscore single only group. Inside of this group, I'm going to create an item with a title of show and an ID of menu main customers show. So what's going on with this menu? All right, I have my delete. He's outside of a group, so he's always going to be visible. And then I have this group right here. Now, if you recall back when we talked about how action bars worked, and we talked about how groups worked, basically groups allow me to show and hide groups of menu items conditionally, based on some sort of condition. Now, we haven't hooked the condition in yet, so it'll always be available, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to group all of the menu items that should only be displayed when only one customer is selected into a single group, so I can show and hide them in one fell swoop in the code. Anyway, that pretty much wraps up our last menu resource that we have to write. So let's jump back into our main activity. Inside here, let's do our onPrepare action mode. So our onPrepare action mode is that method I was talking about. It's that method that's invoked when we invoke the invalidate method. So remember all the way back here, when we toggle our customer selection, we say action mode.invalidate if an action mode is already open? Well, basically, at some point after we invoke and validate, our onPrepareActionMode method is invoked, which means that what I can do here is I can show and hide items based on whatever criteria I want. In this case, how many customers are selected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if selected customers dot size equals 1, then menu, and now this menu object is coming for as a constructor parameter or a method parameter. Menu.set group visible r.id single only group true. Otherwise, menu set group visible r.id single only group false. And then finally, very importantly, returning true. So what we're doing here is we're saying if the selected if we only have one selected customer, show the single only group. Otherwise, hide it. And then go ahead and return true. The return true is important because it tells the contextual action bar that our menu has changed. So if you didn't do that, your menu wouldn't be the visual representation of the contextual action bar wouldn't be updated to whatever menu changes we performed. All right, we're nearing the end here. On action item clicked. So on action item clicked is invoked when one of our toolbar items gets pressed. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say int id equals menu item get id or get item id. If id is r.id, now what I want to do is I want to check to see if it's our delete button. So if it's menu underscore main underscore customers underscore delete, then we want to delete all of the selected customers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say delete customers, and I'm going to pass in selected customers as the parameter. Then I'm going to say action mode.finish because we're clearing all of our selected items. And then I'm going to say return true to indicate that we handled this click event. So this delete customers method works because it takes an iterable, and a hash map, while a hash map is not a list, it is an iterable. So I can satisfy that parameter with this object. All right, next up what I want to do is I want to say if id is r.id menu customers show. So menu main customers show. So if we want to show the customer, then what I want to do is I first need to extract. So this button, this show customers button should only be visible if there's one customer selected. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put in a very important sanity check to prevent my code from having a particular bug, or at least failing early in the case of a potential bug. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say if selected customers.size does not equal 1, then throw new runtime exception saying the show button on the cab may only be pressed if one customer is selected. So, and then, well, we don't need to return anything because we just threw. So we're just throwing an exception here, and we're throwing the exception as a way to crash the app on purpose, because clearly there's a bug somewhere, and this should never, ever, ever happen. I encourage people to write code defensively like this, so things fail early. Your app crashing actually isn't a terrible thing if it's due to a legitimate bug. It's a whole lot better than there being a legitimate bug in your application and your application continuing to run. Okay, so next up what I want to do is now that I've gone ahead and I've checked to see that there's only one customer, I'm going to do something that looks a little funky. I'm going to say customer, I want to extract the only customer from my selected customers. So you might say, well, you can do selected customers.get. Oh, wait, you can't. Why not? Because a hash map is not an array. A hash map does not store items by index. So, how do we go about getting the item out of, the only item out of this selected customers hash map? How do we do that? Well, the hint to doing that is, I said a little bit earlier that the delete customers, when we invoke delete customers with the select customers object, that the selected customer object was iterable. It implements the iterable interface. And if we control click on delete customers, we see how it's used. It's used inside of a for loop. Meaning, what I could do is I could do this. I could say customer for customer C in selected customers, customer equals C. I could do this. I could iterate over my selected customers array and basically extract the first item and only item into a local variable. But I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to do that well, I am going to do it, but I'm going to do it manually. So instead of using the for loop itself, I'm going to say customer equals selected customers dot iterator dot next. So what I'm doing is I'm actually extracting out the iterator for the selected customers object, which just so happens to be how the for loop itself is implemented. So I just wanted to explain this code because it looks really funky to people who may not be familiar with the iterator pattern. But basically all I'm doing in the selected line of code that I have right here is doing what a for loop would do if we had chosen to go that route with the syntax. All right, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and invoke our showCustomer method. And let's go ahead and finish our action mode, which wouldn't normally be required because when I say showCustomer, I'm kind of implying that that's going to open up a new activity. But anyway, finish our action mode and then return true. All right, guys, we made it. We made it all the way down to the last method, onDestroyActionMode. So onDestroyActionMode is invoked when the action mode is finished, which is either through invoking the actionMode.finish method or by clicking on the done button in the contextual action mode. So both of these will make the action mode or onDestroyActionMode callback method be invoked. That is why I'm not setting action mode to null every single time that I invoke finish. Because I'm going to do that on onDestroyActionMode so that if the action mode is destroyed for whatever reason, if the user presses the back button, for example, that the action mode still gets set to null. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I guess, just do that. Now, you might be tempted to say, well, that's easy. Action mode equals null. Well, the fact that this code is squigglified and grayed out should give you a hint that this code is probably not correct. The problem is that although all the way at the top here, we have our action mode field in our main activity that we've been using pretty much everywhere in the activity, there is a action mode parameter that conflicts and takes precedence over that field. So there's a couple ways we can do this. We could rename this parameter to something like ignored. Notice how by doing that, our action mode is no longer squigglified and it's now purple, indicating we're using the field. An alternative is we can access that action mode field directly by typing in main activity.this.actionMode equals null. I prefer this syntax more because it won't require me renaming a parameter that comes from a method from an interface. And I highly discourage people, well, I do it occasionally if it really bugs me, but in general, I highly discourage people from doing that, from renaming parameters for methods that come from an interface, because it could get a little confusing for people who are used to that interface and then are looking at your code and suddenly you're using different parameter names. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to write the last two lines of this code. I'm going to clear out all of our selected customers by doing selectedCustomers.clear, and the last line of code is adapter.notifyDataSetChanged. So we clear out all our customers so that we no longer have any active selections, and we tell the adapter that we are, well, notifying the adapter, the list view, that the underlying data has changed, which will re-render the list, and it'll clear out all of the selected customers. All right, so let's go ahead and hit play. And wait a year or two for Gradle to get its act together. Oh, that's going to ask me... Oh, yeah, we haven't launched this app this whole time here. All right, so now we have this. You'll notice we have our awesome list view. You'll also notice up here we have our Add Customer button, which I can click, and we get inserted customers. You'll also notice that when I tap a customer, check that toast out, showing customer 3, showing inserted showing customer inserted customer 101, showing customer 8, so on and so on. Now for the moment of truth. The whole point of this video, this particular episode, or video rather, is going to be what happens when we long click on a customer. Check that out. So when we long clicked on this customer, our contextual action bar appeared. Notice how it completely replaces the previous action bar. Now let's hit back, and it gets cleared. Let's click on it, and it gets cleared. Let's hit show. We get our show method. Let's hit delete. It gets deleted. Now let's hold down and start clicking on more items. Now notice how when I click on more items and I select more items and deselect them, that the show method appears and disappears depending on if there's only one customer selected. And that's exactly the behavior that we're looking for. So if I want to go ahead and select all these customers, and maybe I want to also scroll all the way down here and delete customer 80, and then scroll all the way back, hit delete. Now scroll all the way down, and let's check out 79 and 81. So item 80 was deleted. Anyway, I just wanted to click through all the functionality of this application real fast to make sure that there weren't any bugs. All right, I think that pretty much wraps up this video with talking about contextual action bars and list views. And we'll see you guys in the next one.